Hello again, and we will start from where we left off, which was basically giving you a mechanism for antiferromagnetic interaction, which was proposed by Anderson, which was for the Hubbard models. Now let us see how we can get ferromagnetic interactions. This was first proposed by Heisenberg, Dirac and Van Vleck, all independently, and it is best illustrated by again taking the case of two orbitals. Consider two degenerate orbitals on an atom. I am intentionally saying on an atom because you will later on see that if they are on different atoms, some of the interactions become very weak and may be negligible in case of molecules. So let these be phi1 r and phi2 r. Well, when you have two degenerate orbitals, then you can actually have as before triplet and singlet states. So we can have a triplet state which can be written as phi1 r1 phi2 r2 minus phi1 r2 phi2 r1 times the spin function. Okay, so this can be either up up, down down, or up down plus down up of the two electrons. And then I have a singlet state which can be written as phi1 r1 phi2 r2 plus phi1 r2 phi2 r1 times up down minus down up. Now if we turn on the electron-electron repulsion between the two electrons, then we get the in first order perturbation theory, the energies of singlets and energies of singlet and triplets are altered as follows. Are corrected as E1 singlet is equal to phi1 r1 phi2 r2 minus phi1 r2 phi2 r1 e squared upon r1 2, same thing, phi1 r1 phi2 r2 minus phi1 r2 phi2 r1, and that of the triplet is the correction is given by with a plus sign in between phi1 r1 and phi2 r2, phi1 r1 phi2 r2 plus just a minute, for the singlet it should be plus here, I am sorry, because the spatial part is symmetric and the spin part is antisymmetric, and for the triplet the spatial part is antisymmetric and spin part is symmetric, so I have to be careful. Minus of phi1 r2 phi2 r1 E squared upon R12, the same thing, phi1 R1, phi2 R2 minus of phi1 R2, phi2 R1. So this is for the triplet. Of course, you can ask how is it that although I have degenerate states, I am doing a non-degenerate perturbation theory. We can get away with non-degenerate perturbation theory because all the matrix elements between off-diagonal matrix elements between these non-degenerate states is 0. So because off-diagonal matrix elements between the degenerate states is 0, simply because of spin orthogonality 0, we can carry out non-degenerate perturbation calculations. So if you were to expand it, what you will find is the following. The singlet state will have the energy equal to A plus J, and the triplet state will have the energy A minus J. Of course, I will have to properly normalize the states. So let me normalize it. Okay, the spin part I am not going to normalize because anyway you are going to get a you assume that the states are normalized by themselves. So what is A? A is the Coulomb integral, which is given by integral phi1 star R1 phi2 star R2 E squared upon R12 phi1 R1 phi2 R2 d cubed R1 d cubed R2. Or I can also write it in the chemist notation, which is probably a little bit better. I can write it as phi1 star R1 phi1 R1 E squared upon R12 phi2 star R2 phi2 R2 d cubed R1 d cubed R2, and this means that there is a repulsion between the charge density of electron 1 and the charge density on electron 2 of electron 2. And then what is J? J is given by the following: phi1 star R1 phi2 star R2 E squared upon R12 phi1 R2 phi2 R1 d cubed R1 d cubed R2. Or if I write it in the chemist notation, then I can write it as phi1 star R1 phi2 R1. There is the electron density of particle 1 or electron 1 E squared upon R12 repelling the other one, which is phi1 R2 phi2 star R2 d cubed R1 d cubed R2. So you see that here I have a what you call a overlap density. Okay, so that means the electron is in the overlap cloud of the orbital 1 and orbital 2, whereas here the electron is confined to orbital 1, and in this case the electron is confined to orbital 2. And because it is in the overlap charge cloud, it depends upon how much spatial overlap of the phi1 and the phi2 are for the J to be determine that determines the magnitude of J. And in molecules, these orbitals are widely spread out. Because these orbitals will be widely spread out even when there is a degeneracy, J is rather small. And of course, in molecular orbitals, getting degeneracy is also not so simple because you don't have the spherical symmetry as in atoms to have the degeneracy. So the degeneracy is actually much lower and sometimes even lifted by perturbations which are just the surroundings. Okay, so now given this, we have the energies ES1 equal to A plus J and E triple 1 is A minus J. And so, or I can write it in the following fashion, that is, I can say that the triplet energy is equal to 0 and the singlet energy is equal to 2J. Okay, and this is taking 0 of energy as A minus J. So, since as you see these are electron repulsion integrals, A and J are both greater than 0, both are positive or repulsive as electron repulsion interaction is repulsive. Now this also can be written as a simple spin Hamiltonian. So I can write down the spin Hamiltonian in this case as H is equal to minus 2J times S1 dot S2 minus 1/4. As you will see, S1 dot S2 minus 1/4 when it operates on a triplet state will give you 0, but when it operates on a singlet state will give you minus 1, and so you will get the eigenvalues ET1 equal to 0 and ES1 equal to 2J. So this is the spin Hamiltonian that can be written for the electron repulsion part. So we see that degeneracy of orbitals is necessary, at least near degeneracy, if not degeneracy, is necessary for ferromagnetic interactions. That is why a single band tight binding, single band Hubbard model does not have ferromagnetism in it. Okay, so this is why one band Hubbard model does not exhibit ferromagnetism. At least at half filling. At half filling. So at 1 electron less than half filling, you can have ferromagnetism by Nagaoka theorem, but that is basically pathological. You can never have a situation where you can precisely have 1 electron less than half filling in a system. Well, let us see what is the interplay of the kinetic exchange and direct exchange leads to different types of magnetic ordering. Indeed, what you see here, actually, let me also remark that this is the origin of the Hund's rule. Hund's rule of maximum multiplicity. Usually kinetic exchange is large if the phase space for delocalization is large. That is, the electrons can easily be delocalized from through multiple configurations. Okay, so this is what you will find generally. The phase space is large for low spin configurations. Because for low spin configurations you do not have the blocking because of the Pauli exclusion principle, and so almost all pathways are possible. But if the orbitals are orthogonal, then one cannot delocalize the electrons. But you still have direct exchange, and so this leads to ferromagnetic interactions. On the other hand, if the orbitals are at 180 degrees and they are overlapping, then you will see that you will have antiferromagnetic interactions. Then antiferromagnetic interactions are favored. So, Goodenough and Kanamori gave general rules based on Anderson kinetic exchange and direct exchange to empirically predict the nature of interactions. So, using these rules you can say, given a system, whether the system is going to be having ferromagnetic interaction or antiferromagnetic interaction and so forth. Okay. So, one way of looking at one way of looking at how you can get ferromagnetic interaction even when you have kinetic exchange, you can show by dealing with, say, let us consider two atoms A which have degenerate orbitals, okay, then we will have the following configurations. So, at half filling, what we will have is, we will have a triplet and singlets which are all degenerate, and then above you will have a triplet state which can be non-degenerate. So, you will have actually 8 of those. Okay. So, here 2 singlets and 2 triplets you will have, and here again you will have A plus A minus can also be triplets. So, you can have triplets here, and then you have a plus A minus which are singlets. Okay. So, these are triplets and singlets. So, let me remove this. So, now what happens is, this energy is the energy U that we always talk about, okay, and this energy is the direct exchange energy which I call K in this case, so as not to confuse with the spin model Hamiltonian exchange parameter J. So now this is the configuration when t is equal to 0. T is equal to 0, you have a neutral, and when you hop an electron from one side to the other, because the orbitals are degenerate, you can have a plus a minus which is a triplet, or you can have an a plus a minus which is a singlet. And if you have a plus a minus which is a triplet, it will have a lower energy than a plus a minus which is a singlet by an amount k, which is the direct exchange integral. Now if you turn on T, then what happens is the following: these states will go up and these states will come down. You will have the singlet here, and then a triplet states will come here. The energy difference here, delta, between the triplet and the singlet will be of this order. You can very simply do the same calculations that I did earlier, and you will see that it is 2t squared upon u minus of 2t squared upon u minus k, because the triplets are pushed down in energy more because it is interacting with lower energy levels than the singlets. The singlets are interacting with an energy with the states which have an energy u. The energy comes in the denominator because it is a second order perturbation calculation, and in the case of triplet it is only u minus k that comes in the denominator, and that is the reason why you have delta which is of this order. And of course this is a very crude way of putting it, so we can have a ferromagnetic exchange in this case. And this was actually proposed by McConnell in the context of organic systems, McConnell's mechanism. So the basically what I am trying to say is that the effective exchange interactions between magnetic sites is a competition between kinetic and exchange, competition between kinetic and direct exchange. And as you see, the entire magnetic interactions come about because of electron repulsions. Magnetic interactions come about due to electron-electron repulsions. If you do not take into account electron-electron repulsions, or even if you take it in the mean field sense, you will see that you would not be able to observe any magnetic interactions. No difference in energy between the singlet and the triplet will come about if you do not consider explicit electron-electron interactions. So let us revisit. The Hubbard chain in the large U limit. Because I am dealing with large U limit, I can say that I always assume without saying that the number of sites is even or the number of electrons is even. So what we will have is we can have states which are covalent, a bunch of states which are singly ionic, and then a bunch of states which are doubly ionic, etc., etc. The energies of these repulsion energies are the following: 0, U, 2U, and so forth. So what we have are the following levels. So I have all A0, which means covalent. So I have the energy 0, and then I have A1 singly ionic, the energy is U, and then A2, which is doubly ionic, the energy is U, and so on and so forth. So this energy is U, this energy is 0, this energy is U, this energy is 2U. Now when I introduce the transfer term, what happens is the following. These states split in energy. The highest spin state will not change in energy, S equal to n by 2, and then S equal to 0 will have the lowest energy, and then in between you have S equal to 1, etc., up to S equal to n by 2 minus 1. And the same thing will happen here, because n is very large, n is like an Avogadro number. So when n is like an Avogadro number, then you just have one pair of doubly ionic ionic sites. It does not mean the you can as well forget about, you can still say that the number is like n, and we have highest spin will be n by 2 minus 1, and then I have n by 2 minus 2, etc., up to 0. And the same thing will happen here, which is a ferromagnetic state. Then S is equal to 0, you have a whole bunch of states. So what are these whole bunch of states that you are going to have? So when you are looking at these states, see, when you have n sites, each with one electron, okay, then the number of possible states is 2 to the power n. Because at every side you can have an upspin or a downspin. So there are two possibilities at every sides. So for n sides you have 2 raised to the power n possibilities. And so these 2 raised to the power n possibilities are actually split into singlets, triplets, quintets, etc. So the numbers are given by a formula known as the Weyl dimensional formula. So here you can have two kinds of excitations. We can have two kinds of excitations. One is the spin state alone is changed, and the second one, the charge, the number of ionic states also changes. The number of ionic states changes together with spin state. So the first kind of excitations are known as spin wave excitations. Type 1 excitations are spin wave excitations. Okay, and type are purely magnetic excitations, and type 2 are known as stoner excitations. here both charge distribution and spin distribution change. In going from the ground state to the excited state. Here only spin distribution changes. So now we have two different kinds of excitations. So let us see what we can say more about these excitations. To see the spin wave excitations, what we can do is, let us consider a ferromagnetic chain, spin chain. Okay, so we will consider a ferromagnetic spin chain. In this, at some site I, okay, I flip the spin. That is the excitation that I am going to create. Because it is a periodic system, the excitation shown above is not the excitation at a single site is not an eigenstate of the Hamiltonian. So to construct the eigenstate, what you really have to do is construct a block state. So the block state that I have is psi of k is equal to sigma over L e to the ik dot L times SL minus operating upon the ground state. So what happens is, the ground state, when site L is there, then it will flip the spin at site L, this SL minus operator, and then you will have a phase factor e to the power ikl associated with the resulting state, and this is summed over all the states, and this is the block state. This is exactly like tight binding band structure, or what we did with the Frenkel excitons, okay, to get the aggregations. So now given this psi k, then the energy is given by E of k is equal to psi k h Heisenberg, let us say psi k, which is the nearest neighbor Heisenberg model that I have. So I can do this calculation, and if I did this, then the energy that I will get would be very simply h cross omega k is equal to 2j times 1 minus cos k. So this is the dispersion. So this is almost like the dispersion that you would see in the other kinds of cases, like either the energy bands or the exciton waves and so forth. So this is the spin waves that we will get, and the way to visualize the spin waves is the following. That is, I can think of a cone at every side, and then so this is a cone, and I have a spin is directed that way. This is the cone, the spin is directed that way. At the third cone, spin is directed somewhere there. This is the cone, and so forth. This is a cone, and then the spin is directed that way, and so forth. So this, when you look at the chain from top, this is how the spin wave will look like. But if you look at it from the front, this is what it will look like. If you look at it from the top, it will look like the following, that is, so you would see that the wave goes like this. So this is why we call it a spin wave. You can get the dispersion experimentally by using inelastic neutron scattering. One can study their dispersion, that is h cross omega k versus k, using experiments like inelectron neutron scattering. So to summarize about the Hubbard model and the Heisenberg models that I've talked about, I showed that when you are at the minimal level when you introduce electron correlations, you get the Hubbard model, and this Hubbard model gives rise to kinetic exchange in the large U limit, and in the smaller U limit it can give you an insulator, and at least the Gutzwiller theory shows that there is a critical U which is UC, above which the system is an insulator and below which the system is a metal. But of course there are problems with this one, as I said before. And then when you look at just a 2 atom system, you can show that the electron repulsions in the large U limit give rise to a magnetic interaction, which is the Anderson kinetic exchange, which is always antiferromagnetic. The ferromagnetic interactions come from direct exchange interactions, and the entire magnetism is a combination of direct exchange and kinetic exchange, and it was shown by Goodenough and Kanamori. They came up with rules to decide under what conditions a material will exhibit ferromagnetism and under what condition a material exhibits ferrimagnetism or antiferromagnetism. So and I also showed you something about the spin waves and the spin excitations and the charge excitations in these interacting systems. So in the next lecture what I am going to be doing is I will continue with the interacting pictures, and I will go to extended range interactions which are found in semiconductors, particularly in organic polymers and organic crystals. So we will talk about a little bit about the extended range interacting models, and then look at what kind of excitation energies that you have in these systems. So until then, goodbye, and we will see you again tomorrow.